Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst. Today's episode is all about mental health and entrepreneurship, which I think is a topic that a lot of people, especially this time of year, need to hear about. So earlier this year in January, I connected with Carolyn Ferrick. She is the host of the Search For Serotonin podcast, a mental health podcast. She has been living with severe high-functioning anxiety, clinical depression, and OCPD, or perfectionism personality disorder, for most of her life. So she decided to take her pain that she was experiencing and turn it into her purpose by sharing her story and launching her podcast. Each week, she aims to educate others on mental health and unite those who are struggling with their mental health. From trauma, denial, and suicide attempts to therapy, healing, and happiness, Carolyn covers all of those topics. So I invited her on the podcast today because I wanted her to talk about her experience starting a mental health podcast. Because starting a podcast is hard in itself. And so when you're experiencing things like anxiety around it, definitely that adds to the challenge. So we talk about how she started her podcast, why she started it, and really her marketing and how it's changed throughout almost a year now that she's had her podcast. This is a really interesting one, so be sure to listen, take some of her advice, and then go connect with her on Instagram. I highly recommend going to talk to her because she is so sweet and also has such good information on social media. I also am excited because this is the first episode that will be 100% on YouTube. And so all of my podcasts are on YouTube, audio only, but this is the first one that is going to be video and audio. So we'll see how this goes, but I'm excited. I'm excited to try something new with the podcast. I'm almost at a year, so I am making some changes as I adapt with my business, espresso podcast production, and also as my interests change. I always tell people that their podcast should transform with them, and so this is a great example. Okay, without any further ado, let's get into this episode with Carolyn Ferrick. Carolyn, welcome to the Employee to Boss podcast. I am so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here, and I cannot wait to see where this conversation takes us today.
Me too. And I think that's the most fun thing with podcasting. We were just talking about this. Both of our podcasts are about to hit a year. And I always think it's fun going into a conversation with like a general topic and just seeing where it goes from there.
Yeah. You never know where you're going to end up. It's always a good time.
Definitely. So if you wanted to start off with introducing yourself and what you do and how you got to be who you are, you have a really cool story. So I'm excited to have the listeners learn about you.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Carolyn Ferrick. I am the host and founder of the mental health podcast, The Search For Serotonin. My journey, actually, like Haley said, started a year ago, and it was probably around summer of 2021 that really my journey kind of started to go. I was working in higher education. I was an admissions counselor for freshman students at a college, and I was also attending grad school for communication studies at the time. At that point in my life, I thought, I'm going to get my corporate job. I'll get through grad school. I'll get a degree, get a higher paying job, maybe go into teaching at a college, something like that. And along the way, I was checking off all the boxes of what everyone was telling you. Hey, this is the recipe for life. You go to school, you graduate, you get a job, get a degree, another degree, and it pays you more. And that's how you progress through life. And I quickly realized that wasn't going to last long term for me. That wasn't going to make me happy. And I have struggled with severe high functioning anxiety, clinical depression, seasonal depression, and I was recently diagnosed with OCPD, which is a perfectionism personality disorder. So while dealing with all of that, I never really processed my mental health until 2020. So at that point, when I was working in higher ed, I was like, I am so unwell mentally. I just feel like an imposter all of the time, so drained. I don't want to be doing this. And then my body kind of was like, hey, we're going to make things right for you in the most unconventional way. And I actually suffered a very severe ankle injury. And so I couldn't leave my house for 4 months. I couldn't drive. I couldn't even get in the shower by myself. So I was like, this is a really hard period for me. So I can sit here with all of this downtime and get in my head and get really hard on myself, or I can do something productive and make something out of this time, maybe help me get to where I want to go. So I just started researching, I started learning, I started asking people I know, just about anything podcast related. And I knew that is kind of the direction I wanted to go in. I knew I wanted to focus on mental health because I'd struggled for so long. I always felt so alone. And yeah, so in those 4 months while I was stuck on the couch, I was just learning as much as possible. I was, joining any courses I could, any Facebook events. That's actually how we met. So just trying to soak in as much knowledge as I could. And then I was able to register my business as an LLC. And then from there, I started just putting out podcast episodes. So it was all self-taught.
I love that. That's awesome. And you started your virtual assistant business as well during this time, correct?
Yeah. So I started the Search for Serotonin as my LLC because I knew the podcast was going to be my main business focus. But I'm not a licensed mental health professional, and I didn't want to start, just throwing stuff out there to see what stuck when I was propelling that into an audience of people who are struggling with their mental health. So I was like, let me do virtual assistant work. In college, I studied communications. I did a lot of social media work, a lot of digital marketing, things like that. So I was like, let me just focus on getting some virtual assistant clients, and that can be the way that I make money. And that gives me some time to really figure out what it is I want to accomplish with my business, with my podcast, what direction I want to go, so I can still make money, but not rush myself to put anything out because I felt like I needed to for the sake of money.
Absolutely. Okay, I love that. So, one of the things I wanted to talk about today was, since you did start this podcast of mental health to help other people through their mental health challenges, like, I understand your why with this, but was it ever challenging? Because I know I talk to so many people who want to start podcasts, but maybe they don't feel like an expert in it, or maybe they are just, nervous, but you were going through these challenges yourself. And so was this kind of like a healing time for you? Like, what was going on in your head during the start of this podcast?
Yeah. So like I said, I kind of started, working on my mental health in 2020. And so I had a year of my own therapy journey, working on my own stuff, being inside of the pandemic, really figuring it out, me as an individual, and learning more about my mental health. And when like I said, I broke my ankle, I felt like, we were at a point in our lives, the world, everything going on. I was like, I feel really isolated, and my mental health is only getting worse, even though we're kind of coming out of the pandemic. And I know there are so many people out there who feel the same way, who have gone through the same struggles. So that is really what motivated me to start putting out episodes, because I had all these stories that I was sitting on. I have attempted suicide in the past. I've had some pretty dark things happen to me in my childhood, and I've made some pretty poor decisions because of my mental health. And I always felt so isolated in that. I felt like there's nobody I could go to get educated about these topics. I was always, presented that therapy was very stigmatized. You only went to therapy if you were like out of your mind, like losing it. Like if you went to therapy, something was like really wrong with you. And so holding on to all of that stuff internally, I was like, why don't I take all of these stories, all of this pain, all of this, confusion, and just start putting it out there to people. And at first it was very research focused. I was doing my own research, trying to put out information about my specific diagnosis as I could. And I was just trying to share information while incorporating my story into it. There was a lot of, question around it. And at first, I think I was just putting it out to do it. In my mind, I was like, messy action, just get it out there, figure out the rest later. And as the year went on, that's when I really started to get into my head and start to have the imposter syndrome come in. But in the beginning, I think it was really just like the hype and the excitement and the, oh my gosh, I'm actually doing this, that kind of distracted all those voices and blocked the imposter syndrome. So I was able to just kind of really put everything out there.
Exactly. I think that's a big point with podcasting, where a lot of podcasters don't make it through their first 3 or 4 months because the hype kind of does, that's when the imposter syndrome starts. But it's the same with business, honestly, where, we both started our own businesses. And I think in the beginning, it's kind of like everything is just falling into place and it's super exciting and you get to tell everyone you're a business owner. And then it starts to add up and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm working way more than I ever was, working for myself, don't have those benefits. And that's really where a lot of people have to decide if they're going to make it or if they're going to step back and go back into like a corporate job. And there's no right answer here, but with you doing all this mental health research and having all of these conversations, can you share some words of advice for anyone who might be in this, emotion, let's call it?
Yeah, yeah. Comparison, I want to say to everybody out there, comparison is what will hold you back, will keep you, where you're at currently or force you to quit. I know there's a quote out there that says comparison is the thief of joy, and that is absolutely 1000% true. I've done it in my own journey. Once I started comparing myself to other podcasters and saying, oh, well, they started maybe later than me, but they're farther along. And so once I got into that mindset of constantly comparing myself and thinking, oh, you should be at this point, but you're not there yet. That's really where I got kind of tripped up this year. And I wish I didn't compare as much. I also would encourage people, don't get discouraged. Like I said, I was at places where I'm like, I want to be farther along or I want to be doing this, but I'm not there yet. And things aren't going to happen the way you want. They're never going to happen as you lay them out. As a perfectionist, I can guarantee tell you that's going to be it. And also, like, it's just you have to keep going for you. You have to do it for your why, your main reasons. You can't do it to compete with someone else or outshine someone else or outprove someone else. You have to do it for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there is a lot of thought in that where comparison is a big part of entrepreneurship when you're first starting. And it's just
Yeah.
like so hard to get away from. When I was first starting my business, I was having the hardest time like actually taking time off. Like I was like, there's no one else who will do my job if I don't do it. It's not like I'm back in corporate where I have a whole team with me. Like it's literally just me. And so there's two things I really want to talk about here. Maybe some tips for anyone who needs to maybe delegate or you are a virtual assistant. So like you see people come to you and same with me. Like my clients come to me when they're done with their tasks and they're like, I need help with this. And so let's talk about that first. Kind of like what advice would you give to someone who maybe is at that mental health breaking point of business?
Yeah. Well, as a perfectionist, I really struggle to like stop working. That's actually a symptom of OCPD is devotion to work and putting work over literally like everything else. So I definitely got caught up in that in my own journey, but that's the benefit of being an entrepreneur is when you need a break, you can say, "Hey, I can step back." You can obviously make sure like the big things get done. If that's all you can do, just like one thing every day, then do that. But you have the freedom now to kind of rework your schedule, or if you can pass it off to somebody else. I know it's really difficult. I struggle with that. Asking for help is a huge, gets me in my head and it gets me spiraling and all that kind of stuff. But for the sake of your mental health and now that you have the ability to do so, you have to remember that like, hey, I can take a mental health day. I don't have to stress myself out. Like that's why I started this business so I can be the creator of my own schedule or do what I want or prioritize my mental health over my business some days if that's what I need to do.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And since you're talking about OCPD, I saw on your Instagram you had like a pin post about how that's different from OCD. And so for anyone listening who's curious about the difference, they can definitely go on your Instagram and find that out. But I would also love to hear, like, I have a lot of clients who are perfectionists in a lot of ways, and I don't struggle with this as much. I just never have had that perfectionist personality, but I do think it's really interesting if you could share maybe some tips on how you've dealt with it, worked through it, because I know this is a part that holds a lot of business owners back. Like, they're too scared to get their self out there. Maybe with a podcast, for example, like they want to start it, but it's not perfect right when they start. And things can change and adapt with your business as you go. But I think a lot of people, are held back by that concept.
Yeah, yeah. And perfectionism is actually not only is it a symptom of OCPD, which, like I said, is a personality disorder, but it's also a trauma response. So, a lot of the times when you're feeling the need to be a perfectionist, it's coming down to, okay, I need to have control over every little detail because if I can control every little detail, then nothing bad can happen or nothing unexpected will happen. And if it does, like I'm prepared for it. And so, something that I really have had to work on, especially in my entrepreneurial journey, I said it earlier, it's something called messy action, where a lot of perfectionists get caught in their head and they're like, I won't start this task or I won't even work on this project because I know it's not going to be perfect, or I don't feel like I've learned enough, or I don't feel like I'm qualified enough. So they'll procrastinate it and put it off. But that prevents them from ever starting it, ever finishing it, ever putting it out. And if you just take one small step every day, it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as you're working towards that goal, working towards that task, whatever it is you're trying to work on, especially with podcasting, like if you're worried about putting out an episode, maybe you just record a small portion of it and say, okay, I'm not going to record this week. It's not done yet, but I'll keep coming back to this. And when I feel like, I've have an episode that I can put together and put out, then there you go. It's not perfect, but you did it. And you can say, at least I accomplished it. And it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be what I want it to be. But as long as you're taking those physical actions to actually follow through with your thoughts and making something of them.
Do you want to start growing your business rapidly in a really fun way? Do you want to increase your visibility and profits? I have just the thing for you. My course, Great Guesting: How to Grow Your Business Through Being a Podcast Guest, is now available, and it's guaranteed to get you on podcasts. Do you want to connect with more clients, share your story, make stronger connections, and grow your audience? But do you find that you're second guessing yourself, are indecisive on a topic because you're into so many things, and thinking, is this even possible? You'll love this step-by-step guide on how to be a podcast guest. We go over 6 lessons that are knowing your story, narrowing down the topic, finding podcasts to be on, setting up your audio, preparing to record, and of course, marketing, because that's what I'm all about. Being a guest can be fun, but if you don't have a plan to go with it, you're really just spending the hour talking. You're not moving your business forward, and that's exactly what this course is designed to teach you. You can find this course on my website at Espresso Podcast Production, and I guarantee you that you will be a guest on podcasts in no time. Exactly, like step by step. I really love that. And I always work with podcasters to like start their podcast, and a lot of them come to me with like nothing planned, really nervous about the whole process. And I always tell them, like, just do it step by step. When you're meant to start your podcast, like you feel like a calling for this. And so I think that's a great point. I love talking about like different marketing strategies that people use, but I think yours is going to be really interesting because, like you said, you're not a mental health expert, right? Or, you know, licensed, whatever it may be. And so I'd love to hear kind of how you work through that with your podcast marketing to reach the right audience, but make it clear, like, this is not professional advice, blah, 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 all of those things.
Yeah, I'm constantly putting like in captions in episodes whenever I'm talking about stuff. I continuously say, I'm not a professional. I'm just somebody doing my own research, sharing my own experiences. And so when I first started out, my marketing strategy was very detailed, really. So on Mondays, I'd post a video clip about the episode. And then on Wednesdays, I would try and do a carousel infographic. So if I was doing a solo episode, what research I shared that week. If I had a guest, what were they talking about? What information could I pull from what they said in the episode to then turn it into a carousel? And then I would do some kind of relatable quote post at the end of the week. And I started to do that until probably this past summer. That was my whole strategy. It was just constantly pumping out infographics and then doing the videos and putting out this research that I was saying, I'm not a professional. This is just where I found it. Here's my source kind of thing. And that really led to a lot of anxiety for me because the constant need to be like, hey, I'm putting out this research and this information, but I'm not a professional. And what if people don't read? And what if they perceive it as me spreading misinformation? So I decided, why not switch up how I'm doing things? Let's do more posts about my life. Let's do more reels about how I'm actually feeling. And that actually led to my series that I started doing. I just posted day 25 the other day because I don't do it every single day. But I, put like day 1 of recording myself to remind myself that I'm alive, I love my body, and, I'm grateful for myself no matter what. And that series really started to take off. It really started to get a lot of interaction with people. People would tell me, this is such a great idea. You've inspired me to do this. And then those started to get a lot of views. So I was like, cool, I'm going in the right direction. People want to see more of like me and my experiences and not as much of the research. And I don't need to, always have the research or the facts to make myself quote unquote credible, because my experiences in and of themselves are already valid and people receive that and respond to that.
I like that a lot. And I also want to hear like, have you gotten, because I know you had a lot of growth on Instagram, which is incredible. I love your reels. They always pop up for me and I'm like, oh, look at her go, like incredible. And so, and it also is like super value packed. All of your reels, like very valuable. They're not those like filler, fluffy type of reels. Like you share great information on them. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you've had a lot of growth on Instagram. I would love to hear kind of like that feedback that you get from your listeners or people who find you on Instagram. I'm sure it makes it all worth it. Like all the pain, all the struggles starting a podcast, like hearing what people say and coming to you. Because sometimes it's not the licensed professionals who are relatable, right? It's going to be people like you who are sharing your experiences. So do you want to share some like incredible feedback you've gotten or just some positive notes?
Yeah. So with the body image videos, I would record like a 4-second clip. Like I wasn't even doing anything crazy in those videos. And people would write, long messages saying, this is so inspiring. I've always hated how I looked on recordings too. Like, I'm going to start trying this. And I always come back and say, okay, if you're going to start doing it and you post it, like, let me know. Like, I want to follow your journey. I want to see you like do the same thing because to me, it's very much like, you're another human who feels the same way I do. And if this has inspired you to help you do that, I want to see you like feel better about yourself. I want to see you like benefit from this. So that has been really, really great. I've loved the interaction I've gotten from that series. I have built up some pretty devout followers from people who are not already in my life from all over the world. And a lot of them tend to be OCPD diagnosed people as well. And they just express, hey, I have this. There's no information I can find. I feel so alone in this. No one else is talking about this. So thank you for just sharing what you go through. So those ones are also very, very meaningful to me as well. But I think the most valuable in my eyes are when people from my own life that I maybe haven't talked to since like childhood reach out to me. I had a childhood family friend reach out when I started the podcast, and she was like, everything you've been saying, I've been feeling my whole life too. Like, I've never related so much to anything. I never knew that you went through this. I had no idea she had gone through that. I've had people come to me and tell me that listening to my podcast helped them get a diagnosis and figure out their own issues. Because earlier this year, I was feeling like I had ADHD. I was relating to a lot of the symptoms. So I did a formal evaluation and I shared that process with my podcast listeners. And I had someone reach out and say, hey, my daughter's been struggling with anxiety for so long. We took her to so many doctors. We couldn't figure out what was going on. And after hearing your episodes about your diagnosis process and all of that, we were able to finally get her an ADHD diagnosis that made sense for her. So it's really hearing that people are getting help from this. People are learning about their own diagnosis and their own mental health issues more just from me sharing, what goes on in my life every week. So yeah, I'm so grateful for everybody's responses, everybody who reaches out. And I always interact with people when they slide into my DMs. If they comment, I'm responding to everybody. Like, I just love interacting with people. So
I absolutely love that. It's really because you're growing this community of trust and just being vulnerable with the people who might need it. Because in my personal life, like, not many people talk about mental health. And so, I mean, with my close friends, maybe, but really not in this industry, entrepreneurship. It's still not spoken about a lot. So I think what you're doing is absolutely so incredible.
thank you. I really appreciate it. A lot of the times I'm like, what you're doing doesn't matter and no one's benefiting from it. And then people will tell me, they're like, thank you so much. You're helping. So, if I can help change one person's life or, help with any way, shape, or form in anybody's mental health journey, then that's a successful day for me. That's a win.
Absolutely. That's so powerful. And that's really why I wanted you on this podcast, because entrepreneurs need to hear this stuff. They need to hear that they're not alone and that, we'll hire a business coach, but sometimes business is prioritized over mental health. And I think that's something that in the next coming years, the next generation, I do see that potentially changing, because there's people like you who are finally talking about what people are actually feeling.
Yeah. And what I've learned this year, especially through interviewing other women, is that there's not one path to finding out what works for you. Yes, therapy, medication, a lot of people that works for them. But I talk to so many women who have healed through EFT tapping, who have healed through hypnosis, who have healed through subconscious, all that different kind of stuff that people don't talk about. Oh, I also interviewed a holistic wellness coach, and she helps people with holistic wellness and healing through those kinds of methods as well. So just knowing that there's other avenues out there and bringing awareness to that as well, I think is really powerful, because sometimes people don't want to go to therapy. They feel too uncomfortable. It's not the right fit for them. So just bringing awareness to there are other ways to get treated and find help. What works for you is not going to work for everyone else, and what works for everyone else may not always work for you. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I have another friend in the podcast industry who talks about, her podcast is called Wellness and Wonderlust. And so it's a lot of travel and wellness, and it's super fun. And she started her podcast because she lives somewhere in Florida. And she's like, there's not a lot of alternative healing methods here. She's like, if you live in LA or a big city on the West Coast, then you're able to see all these things. But a lot of people are not actually presented these different ways that they could heal themselves. So that's super cool that you're talking to so many different people who are letting other people know about other options out there for them.
Yeah, I've learned a lot this year because I had none of this information at this time last year. So just getting the chance to talk to women all over the world. I've literally interviewed women in Australia, women in the UK, people from everywhere. And to have these really connecting conversations, and it just shows you how many people out there really truly do feel the same way and have found other ways to get past it and grow from it. So it's so inspiring.
Yeah, I also feel that podcasting has given me this sounds so weird, but more compassion for strangers because I'm like, everyone has a really cool story. And a lot of people don't share it. Of course, I will not meet most of the people in the world, but I'm like, everyone has their own story. And sometimes that creeps me out to think like people walking down the street are living a whole life that like I will never know about. But I think through podcasting, I definitely have had a lot more compassion for others.
Yeah, yeah, you definitely really learn how to listen and change your perspectives and kind of receive what other people feel and how other people are approaching things. And like you said, it makes you more compassionate because once you get into someone's mind and realize, oh, that's what they're going through, or this is how they feel, you can then look at it through their lens and really break down those walls or break down those stigmas and get to more compassionate and more empathetic level.
Totally, absolutely. Well, I have loved this conversation. And to start wrapping up my episodes, I love asking the guests to share 3 actionable tips that the listener can start with today to, you could do something about mental health or move forward in their business. Whatever 3 actionable tips you want to challenge the audience today, let's do it. Let's hear what they are.
Okay, so mental health related. So something that I have done, I used to do what I called these happy days where I would block out one day in my schedule and just say no work, wake up in the morning, ask yourself, what's going to make me happy today? Is it going to be going and sitting in the park and reading a book, or is it laying and binge watching Netflix and ordering a cheeseburger? And I know not everybody can devote a whole day. So even if you have like an hour in your schedule, whether it be your lunch hour or in the evening, if you have an hour free, maybe just dedicate that time and say, this is my self-care hour. And I'm going to block out work. I'm going to block out social media, online, all of that, no emails, and just focus on me and what I need to listen to my body and my mind. So that is tip number 1. Tip number 2 is if you can keep like scented lotions, or I like crystals. I like to keep crystals in my hand to kind of like fidget with, because if I have anxiety, if I have something in my hand that I can like move around or play with, that's always really helpful, especially when I'm trying to get stuff done and I'm kind of going through it. Like, I need to keep being productive. So just a quick, like, let me take a break to put on some lotion, get a good smell, recenter myself, or let me grab a crystal, or I've used like therapy dough where it's like scented Play-Doh that is supposed to like relax you and all of that kind of stuff. So just having those little things at your desk that you can quickly grab and say, I just need like 5 seconds to bring myself back into my body and get out of my own head. So that's tip number 2. And tip number 3 would be to keep going and keep growing. If you keep going, you're not quitting, you're still moving forward, you're taking that messy action. And if you are going, you're going to be growing, whether you see it or not. So just keep moving forward and keep believing in yourself.
I love those. And I've never heard of the term messy action before you told me about it on this podcast. So I think that's like a really cool concept because on those days where it feels like nothing's actually happening, things still are. Things are happening.
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was way more common, but I also have had a lot of people tell me they have never heard of it before. But yeah, if you can just do one little thing and removing that productivity aspect and putting so much pressure, just say, let me take one step or let me do one piece. Like, it's so helpful and it really helps you move forward every day.
I love that. Carolyn,
Yeah.
where can people come and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can find the Search for Serotonin podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and I am now on YouTube. So if you want to watch me throughout the podcast recording, I do a lot of hand gestures. I make a lot of weird faces. So you can now see me on YouTube. And we are also on, well, it's just me, but I'm on TikTok at the Search for Serotonin. I don't post a lot on there. You can also find me on Instagram at the Search for Serotonin. That is where I'm most active. And that is where I will be posting any and all updates with me, the business, the podcast, all of it.
Awesome. Yes, definitely for the listeners. Go find her on Instagram because I'm telling you, these reels are good. They're really good.
Thank you. Thank you. I literally just wing it every single time, and I just pull from whatever I'm going through. So it's very real and raw and just kind of thrown together. But I appreciate the kind words.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've loved this conversation. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you as well. And I'm so glad I could be here today.
Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.